Hi, I'm Pato from KanjiLink. In this video, I would like to explain how to make the te form of verbs in Japanese. I have to warn you first, the te form is one of the biggest challenges of the beginner level. First, because its conjugation is much more complicated than the forms like mas form. But the goal of this video is to help you memorize the conjugation, so take it easy. The second reason why te form is difficult is because it's not a tense in itself. It only makes sense when it is connected to something else. Which is exactly why te form is so important. It can be connected to so many things that it will incredibly expand the limits of what you can do in Japanese. But don't worry too much about these connections right now. Let's focus on the conjugation. We will start with Group 1 verbs. So far, all Group 1 verbs had a similar conjugation. For example, to make mas form, you turn the ending u into a i and add mas. That was pretty straightforward. With te form, the conjugation changes depending on the verb ending. But there are a few endings that have the same conjugation, so let's start by learning the subgroups inside Group 1. The first subgroup is the verbs that end with the syllable u, tsu, or ru. The second subgroup is the verbs that end with the syllable nu, bu, or mu. Then we have three more subgroups, the verbs that end with ku, the verbs that end with gu, finally the verbs that end with su. Okay, one more time. Inside the Group 1 there are 5 subgroups, verbs that end with u, tsu, ru, verbs that end with nu, bu, mu, verbs that end with ku, verbs that end with gu, and verbs that end with su. Now that you know the subgroups, let's have a look at the conjugation. For the verbs that end with u, tsu, ru, you take out the ending and put te instead. Don't forget the small tsu, this is a double consonant. For the verbs that end with nu, bu, mu, you take out the ending and put nde instead. For all the verbs that end with ku, you replace ku with ite. All the verbs? Wait, actually, there is an exception. The verb iku, to go, doesn't become iite. It turns into ite with a small tsu, just like the first subgroup. So let's add this little exception here and move on to the fourth subgroup, the verbs that end with gu. Maybe you can guess this one now that you know that ku becomes ite. Just add the ten. Ku becomes ite, so gu becomes ide. Finally, for all the verbs that end with su, you replace su with shite. By the way, if you leave the te form like that, without connecting it to anything, you can use it to make an informal request to a friend or a family member. Let's practice all these conjugations. What would this verb become, matsu, to wait? We replace the final tsu with te. Don't forget the small tsu. Matsu becomes matte. We hear it a lot in movies, drama, and anime. Matte, wait. Can you try with nomu, to drink? Take out the final mu and put nde instead. Right, nomu becomes nonde, drink. How about kiku, to listen? That's right, you turn the final ku into ite. Kiku becomes kiite with a long e sound. Kiite, listen to me. Keep it up. Nugu, to take off, clothes or shoes. The final gu is replaced with ide. Nugu becomes nuide. Kutsu o nuide, take off your shoes. Last example, kasu, to lend. So how do you say lend it to me? Replace the final su with shite. Kasu becomes kashite, lend it to me. Very good job. Now that you studied the first group, the other groups will look so easy. Group 2 verbs always end with ru, with the a or e ending syllable before, and anytime we want to conjugate a Group 2 verb, the ending ru just disappears. All you have to do is to replace it with te. So how would you say look? The verb to look is miru. Take out the ru and put te instead. Exactly. Miru becomes mite, look. Sayonara, Group 2. Group 3 is also easy. The two irregular verbs suru, to do, and kuru, to come, have the same conjugation as mas form. Suru becomes shi and kuru becomes ki. Then we just add te. Let's practice with denwa suru, to call. Ask your friend to call you. Denwa shite. Okay, Group 2 and 3 were easy. But do you remember Group 1? Not so sure? Let's summarize everything. Inside the group 1, there are 5 subgroups. Verbs that end with utsuru become te with a small tsu. Verbs that end with nubumu become nde. Verbs that end with ku become ite, except the verb iku, to go, which becomes itte with a small tsu. Verbs that end with gu become ide, and verbs that end with su become shite. For group 2, we just replace the final ru with te. In group 3, suru becomes shi and kuru becomes ki. Then you can add te. There are many things that you can do with te form, but please take the time to memorize the conjugation first. And don't forget to rest. If you need more help with Japanese, check out my website, kanjilink.com.